I never planned on working nights again. Not after the accident, the one people like to call a miracle, because 3 passengers survived. They don't mention the part where I spent 19 minutes trapped under a rolled SUV, unable to move, listening to a teenager bleed out beside me while the engine hissed like it might explode. They don't mention that I still wake up hearing sirens that aren't there. 20 years as a firefighter and EMT leave, marks you don't see on MRIs. I retired early, knee ruined, nerves shot, pension thinner than promised. I needed work again, just not the kind where lives hinge on my reflexes. Something quiet, predictable, boring would have been fine. That's how I ended up at St. Alder Memorial Hospital, a rural facility wedged between a cornfield and a stretch of highway nobody repairs. Parts of it looked brand new: automatic doors, LED signage, fresh pavement. Other parts looked like they belonged in a different century: old brick walls, boarded windows, a covered walkway leading to a building with a sun-faded sign that simply read Pediatric Wing, closed since 1998. During the interview, I sat across from Edwin Turner, head of security. He had a face carved out of discipline: straight back, clipped hair, eyes that measured every word I said. The office smelled like old coffee and military disinfectant, the kind that burns your nostrils a little. "You're overqualified," he said, flipping through my paperwork. "Most applicants don't have combat rescue experience. I can still check doors and write reports," I told him. "Just slower." A small smile twitched at the corner of his mouth, barely there. "You understand protocols? They kept people alive," I said. "You don't ignore rules when buildings are burning." Turner nodded like he'd been waiting for that answer. Then he opened a filing cabinet and pulled out a dark green folder with bent corners and a label typed in block letters: "After Hours Security Protocols, 1999, 2008, 2013, 2021. The number of revisions alone felt wrong. I opened it expecting standard procedures: pharmacy locks, patient disturbance policies, protocols for intoxicated visitors. What I got instead was 9 rules. Not guidelines. Rules. The first one made my mouth go dry. 1. If camera 12 turns on by itself, do not look at the feed. Turn off the monitor and continue your route. Camera 12 had a handwritten note beside it: Pediatric Wing, South Hallway. I looked up. "Isn't that building sealed off?" Turner folded his hands. "It is. Just follow the rule." Rule 2 didn't help too. Do not open the doors to the Pediatric Wing between 2:00 a.m. and 3:00 a.m. "Because of structural damage?" I asked. His silence was answer enough. Rule 3 was worse. 3. If you hear children calling your name, do not respond. They are not talking to you. I let out a short breath, half confused, half amused. "You running a haunted attraction on the side?" No smile this time. He continued flipping pages like he'd done this speech before. 4. If the light in room 405 turns on, report it. Do not approach. 5. Do not escort anyone wearing hospital gowns after midnight. 6. Do not engage with staff you don't recognize if they are not in uniform. 7. If elevators open on their own, use stairs. All radios must be powered off at exactly 3:33 a.m. for 1 minute. 9. Do not discuss these rules with patients or daytime staff. I lowered the paper slowly. These are specific. They're based on incidents, Turner said. And before you ask, no, I will not explain them. Your job is to follow them exactly. The way he said exactly reminded me of captains on fire calls people who have buried friends. I thought about pressing him, but Rent doesn't care whether a job feels unsettling. "I'll take the position," I said. Turner released a breath like he'd been holding it. "You start tonight. 11 to 7. Should be quiet." The word should didn't feel reassuring. I spent the first half of the shift getting to know the building. Daytime hospitals feel clinical, sterile, alive. Nighttime hospitals feel like they're waiting for what I didn't know. Vents breathed warm air. Tile floors echoed footsteps long after they stopped, and even empty hallways felt like they remembered pain. I passed the closed pediatric wing on patrol. The murals on the wall faded turtles with backpacks, smiling bears in wheelchairs peeled like sunburnt wallpaper. Someone had drawn a row of balloons across the entrance decades ago. Now they looked like wilted fruit. The air there was colder, like stepping from summer into late autumn. No breeze, just temperature dropping without reason. I told myself the HVAC system was uneven. Old building, old pipes. But part of me noticed how still the air was. Cold without movement isn't weather, it's presence. Back in the security office, monitors showed the hospital in grayscale. Cameras flickered occasionally old wiring. I figured, I watched them more out of boredom than precaution. Nothing happened. Nothing at all. Then one monitor clicked. Not glitched activated. Camera 12. I hadn't touched anything. The feed crackled, static shifting into shapes. A hallway appeared darker than the others, tiles cracked. Children's murals barely visible in the camera's limited light. The pediatric wing. Something moved at the far end of the hall, blurred by distance and interference. I leaned closer without meaning to, hand reaching for the brightness dial. The voice of Turner echoed in my mind, "Follow them exactly." Rule #1 wasn't long, but it was clear. If camera 12 turns on by itself, do not look at the feed. Turn it off, walk away. My finger hovered over the switch. Static deepened. The shape at the end of the hall paused. Head if it was a head tilting slightly toward the lens. The image sharpened just enough to suggest height. Small. Child-sized. No footsteps, no breathing, just that faint electronic hum. Something shifted in my chest, a mix of dread and something else. Something like pity. Curiosity is how mistakes begin. I killed the monitor. The screen went black instantly. The room felt different afterward, not quieter, just aware. Like the building had noticed me back. I sat there for a long time, staring at the blank screen, trying to convince myself it was just old wiring, just electrical noise, just a glitch. But hospitals don't glitch in ways that watch you. And I couldn't shake the feeling that camera 12 hadn't just turned on. It had looked for me. By the second night, the rules stopped feeling like superstition and started feeling like warnings carved into a landmine map. I tried to treat everything rationally: old wiring, air currents, failing infrastructure, but hospitals at night have a way of peeling those excuses away one layer at a time. My shift started normally. Rounds every 40 minutes, badge scans at designated checkpoints, radio check-ins with Turner. I took notes like a good employee, even taped the protocol sheet inside my notebook, so I wouldn't forget any rule in the middle of a long hallway. Still, I couldn't help testing the edges. Not breaking rules, just observing them. The first anomaly happened near the east wing. That part of the building had been sealed for renovations long before I was hired. The power was supposedly shut off, breakers disconnected, wiring flagged for removal. And yet, halfway through my route, a soft glow bled through the window of room 405. At first I thought it was a reflection, maybe security lights from the parking lot. But the angle was wrong. It was coming from inside. Warm, steady light, like an old bedside lamp. Rule #4 came back to me instantly. If the light in room 405 turns on, report it. Do not approach. I stood at the end of the hallway staring through the glass pane. The door to 405 was locked, hinges coated with layers of dust thick enough to write in. My breath fogged on the window, though the hallway wasn't cold. I checked my radio and whispered dispatch. This is Night Guard 1. Light observed in 405. Confirm status. Static crackled. Then Turner's voice cut through, low and controlled, acknowledged. Do not approach. Continue your route. He didn't sound surprised. I moved on, but the light stayed on long after I turned the corner, illuminating the hallway behind me like a watchful eye. Later, near the central atrium, I heard wheels. Not carts, wheelchair wheels. Slow, steady rotations over polished tile, rubber squeaking occasionally like weight shifting in the seat. But the cameras showed nothing. Every feed was empty, sterile, motionless. Just a sound sliding somewhere behind the walls, like the past was rolling down hallways it no longer belonged to. I followed the noise, keeping distance. My flashlight beam shook more than I wanted to admit. The sound turned into a faint metallic rattle, like someone tapping the wheelchair frame with their fingernails. When I reached the intersection outside the pediatric wing, the sound stopped instantly, like it had reached its destination. The hallway ahead was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet where sound isn't just absent, it's unwelcome. The double doors to the pediatric wing sat chained and padlocked, metal bolted over the handles. Paint around the frame was chipped, where something had scratched into it. Just above the handle, faint and uneven, were tiny marks like finger gouges. Child-sized. I backed away and resumed rounds. But the worst moment came just past what Turner called the crusty corridor, where two buildings met at mismatched angles. That was where the intercom system, the one Turner said had been disconnected in 2010, crackled to life. At first, I thought it was static. Then it turned into laughter. Not playful laughter, short, breathy giggles like someone excited, but trying not to be caught. The sound bounced through every speaker in the hall, overlapping, like multiple children whispering to each other from inside the walls. Then they said my name, not shouted, giggled. The sound slid down my spine like ice water. Rule #3 pulsed in my head. If you hear children calling your name, do not respond. I turned off my flashlight, stood still, and listened. The laughter stopped as suddenly as it started. After that, I should have returned to the office. Should have taken the hint. Instead, I let curiosity pull me toward the pediatric wing. I told myself I wouldn't cross the threshold. Just observe. Just confirm nothing was there. I stood 10 feet from the sealed doors. The temperature dropped, not gradually, instantly, like stepping into a freezer. My breath fogged in front of me, thick and white. Shadows on the other side of the door stretched unnaturally long, like moonlight coming from somewhere inside, even though the building had no power. Then I saw her. A silhouette in a wheelchair, small, shoulders hunched forward, head bowed, facing the wall, completely still. I blinked hard, thinking maybe my eyes were turning shapes into patterns. The figure didn't move, but the wheelchair wheels twitched like someone was shifting their weight. I took one step back. The figure lifted its head, but only slightly, like listening. That's when my radio clicked on without anyone pressing the button. Turner's voice, sharp, urgent, and not at all calm. Did you speak to them? Static swallowed the rest. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because the silhouette in the wheelchair slowly turned its head toward me. And there were no eyes. Just hollow darkness where a face should be. Turner didn't say much the next morning. When he relieved me at shift change, he just studied my face the way paramedics check for concussion symptoms. Quiet, clinical, like he already knew what I'd seen, but wanted to hear whether I'd admit it out loud. I almost asked him who they were, why the wheelchair turned on its own, why the intercom called my name in voices that sounded too close to memory. But he cut off the conversation before it started. "You're doing fine," he said. "Just don't break protocol." That was all. No explanation. No reassurance. Just that same steady warning disguised as small talk. By my third week, I couldn't ignore the questions anymore. So when Turner clocked out early one night and handed me the keys, I followed him to the parking lot before he could leave. "You know what's in that wing," I said. "You've seen them." He paused, one hand on his car door. His jaw tightened. "I've seen enough." That's not an answer. He let out a breath and leaned against the frame like the weight of the topic physically pulled him down. "This hospital used to serve 3 counties, he finally said. Before the budget cuts. Before the lawsuits. Before '98. The way he said the year felt rehearsed. Like he'd been avoiding the story long enough that the words had fossilized. What happened in '98? His eyes drifted toward the dark silhouette of the pediatric building, the locked doors, the boarded windows, the hallway no one entered after 3 a.m. "You ever heard about the Pine Hollow summer camp accident?" he asked. I shook my head. Bus flipped on Highway 47. Wet roads, bad brakes, driver fell asleep, we never got a clear report. They brought every kid who survived to this hospital because it was closest. How many made it? Turner's voice went low. None. They all died in the pediatric wing before sunrise. Silence tightened around us, heavy and deliberate. And you think what? Their spirits stuck here. He gave a humorless half smile. I think the building kept something it shouldn't have. And I think whatever got left behind doesn't know how to leave. That might have been the end of the conversation, but something in his expression shifted regret, maybe fear, and he added, "It wasn't just the deaths." Afterward, staff started quitting. Nurses refused to walk the hall alone. Janitors reported toy balls rolling down the corridor in the middle of the night. One doctor swore she saw kids playing tag in the reflection of a window, but not in the hallway itself. I felt that same cold from the night before seep into my bones, but Turner wasn't finished. The hospital shut that wing down the next month. They boarded everything, cut power, sealed records. Nobody's used it since. Nobody living, anyway. When he finally drove off, I went back inside, unable to shake the feeling that the building itself was listening. Curiosity gnawed at me the rest of the night, until I finally did something stupid. I opened the archival filing room. The hospital kept old patient logs stored in binders thick enough to stop bullets, yellowed labels, water-stained corners, dust so thick it looked soft. I pulled the box labeled Pediatric Ward June, August 1998. Inside were intake forms. Names, ages, cause of death, all under 12. But that wasn't what froze me. It was the timestamps. Every chart listed the same official time of death, 2:43 a.m. Different injuries, different beds, different attending physicians. But every single child, 21 in total, died at the same minute. The fluorescent light above me flickered once, then went steady. The room felt tighter, like the shelves had inched closer while I wasn't looking. I flipped through pages faster, my breath getting shorter. It couldn't be coincidence. Hospitals don't have mass casualty events where every victim dies at the exact same moment. Not from unrelated trauma. Not after hours of treatment. Not according to 5 different doctors. Unless they didn't die from their injuries. Unless something else happened at 2:43. As that thought settled into my skull, a soft sound echoed down the hallway outside. A knock. 3 taps. Light, quick, almost polite, like small knuckles tapping a classroom desk. I froze, listening. Another knock. 3 beats. Exactly the same rhythm. It was coming from the security office door behind me. I moved slowly, quietly, until I could see the small window in the upper half of the door. The hallway lights beyond it were dim, motion sensors waiting to be triggered. No shadows. No movement. No footsteps retreating. Just silence. And then the last knock, soft, barely audible, right at 2:43 a.m. by the clock on the wall. This time, it wasn't a request. It sounded like a child asking to be let in. The hospital was one thing. I could accept strange noises, flickering lights, and shadows that didn't belong so long as they stayed behind locked doors. But when the dead start following you home, routine stops being a coping mechanism and starts feeling like denial. At first, it was subtle. One morning after a long shift, I got home, threw my jacket over a chair, and opened the fridge to grab orange juice. When I shut the door, plastic alphabet magnets clattered to the floor, bright red, blue, and yellow letters scattering across the tile. Annoying, not supernatural. But when I reached down to scoop them up, I froze. They hadn't fallen randomly. They spelled my name. Dan. I stared at them long enough that my coffee went cold in my hand. I didn't have kids. I didn't even own magnets like these. They weren't here the day before. I swept them into a drawer and tried not to think about it. The next night, my recliner started rocking. Just a slow, gentle sway, like somebody small was climbing into it and shifting their weight. The room was dead still, no air vents blowing, no truck rumbling past outside. But the chair swayed anyway, rhythmic and almost content. I sat on the couch and watched it until sunrise. 2 days later, things escalated. On my way to the hospital, I tossed my uniform jacket into the passenger seat like always. When I parked and reached for it, I noticed something on the fabric: wax crayon smears. Pink, yellow, green. Like a child had been drawing on it. I checked the dashboard and found a folded piece of paper wedged into the display. A drawing. 5 kids holding hands, stick figure style, standing beside a tall figure with a security badge drawn on the chest. At the top, written in thick wax strokes, "We remember you." I sat there in the parking lot with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles hurt, the drawing trembling in my lap. Remember me from where? From the hallways. From 2:43 a.m. From somewhere older? That night, Turner cornered me during shift change. "Look," he said quietly. "I know you think you're keeping distance. But whatever's in that wing, it doesn't see you as staff anymore." "What does it see me as?" His jaw worked, muscles shifting like he didn't want to say it. "As someone who walks with them." Before I could ask what he meant, another guard, Reeves, older guy, work days, approached us with a concerned look. "Hey, Dan," he said cautiously, "not trying to freak you out, but you know you shouldn't hold hands with kids on the floor, right? Liability thing." I stared at him. "What kids?" Reeves blinked, confused. "I saw you yesterday on camera. You were escorting 2 of them down the North Hall. I thought maybe it was some visitation thing. Family access request, didn't know that wing was open again." He stopped talking when he saw the look on my face. "What?" he asked. I was alone. Reeves went pale. Slowly pale. Like his blood pulled away from the surface. "You were walking," he whispered, "but your hands were lowered. Stretched out like they were holding on to you." I didn't respond. He walked away without another word. That should have been the worst of it, but the ghosts had one more escalation lined up. At 3:12 a.m., while I was doing rounds, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown sender. No subject. Just an attachment. A photo. I opened it. It showed me standing in the west hallway, same jacket, same flashlight, same posture I held 10 minutes prior. But I wasn't alone. 5 faint figures surrounded me. Children. Their shapes were vague, translucent like fog caught in human form. Faces blurred, but outlines unmistakable. One girl with pigtails, one boy clutching something like a stuffed bear, 2 others holding hands, one in a wheelchair pushed by no one visible. All of them looking at me. No caption. No sender. No explanation. Just proof. I stared at the photo until my hands started shaking, then slowly locked my phone and kept walking. The hallway lights flickered overhead. Behind me, one of the motion sensors clicked on, brightening a section of corridor I hadn't stepped into yet. As if someone small had just run ahead. By the time week 5 rolled around, I'd stopped pretending this was just a job. When voices follow you home and drawings appear in your car, you don't get to clock out and leave things at the door. The hospital didn't feel like a workplace anymore. It felt like something that had attached itself to me. Like the spirits had chosen me long before I realized I was being chosen. The strange part was that I wasn't afraid the way I should have been. The kids didn't feel violent or predatory. Every encounter felt like a tug, a request, something unfinished. As a former firefighter and EMT, I'd seen death come unfairly to children. Maybe that guilt clung to me more than I wanted to admit. The deeper I dug into the hospital's history, the harder it became to shrug this off as superstition. One night during rounds, I found a cart full of old VHS tapes shoved behind medical records from the late 90s. They were dusty, unlabeled, except for dates scribbled in fading ink. I dragged one into the break room and inserted it into an ancient TV VCR unit. The footage crackled and flickered. Then slowly came into focus pediatric ward morning rounds. Nurses adjusting the 4 lines, parents dozing in chairs, doctors scribbling on charts. Everything looked normal, painfully human. Then the camera panned toward room 405. Children lay in beds, bandaged and pale. A nurse was fixing a heart monitor, blocking part of the view. Behind her stood a doctor wearing a lab coat, mid-40s, clean haircut, tired eyes. His badge read Dr. Hale. He still worked here, though I'd only ever seen him doing administrative tasks, never actual clinical rounds. He stood perfectly still as the camera moved, and when the nurse stepped aside, he looked directly into the lens. Not startled. Not curious. Almost resigned. I stopped the tape and tracked him down that same night near the staff elevators. He looked smaller in person, older, like the years since that footage had crushed him instead of aging him. When I asked why every child from the crash died at the exact same minute 2:43 a.m., he didn't even flinch. He said, "Trauma cases often deteriorate in parallel." I told him that wasn't an answer, just a shield. He told me to let them rest. The way he said it, I couldn't tell if he meant the children or himself. Later, during rounds, I found myself talking to the night nurse. I'd seen her a dozen times, but never paid attention, always calm, always tired, moving like someone who had been here long enough to outlast new staff and maybe new decades. Without turning from the supply cart, she said, "You've been near that wing more than you should." I said it was part of rounds. She said rounds weren't the same as choices. When she finally faced me, her voice was softer than I expected. "They don't want to hurt you," she said. "They want to be discharged." I waited for context, but she just pulled a folded paper from her pocket and handed it to me. It was a list of patient names dated 1998, 21 children. Some of the names matched drawings that had appeared in my Jeep and on my apartment fridge. She looked at me with tired empathy. "They chose you?" I asked. "Chose me for what?" She only replied, "To finish what never got finished," and walked away before I could ask more. Not long after, I heard the children again. Not through the intercom or down a hallway, but close, like they were standing beside me. The whisper sounded like it came from a child's breath, no more than a foot away. "Will you take us home?" There was no anger in the question, just longing, and something about that made my chest tighten more than any threat could have. Near the end of my shift, alarms flickered across my monitor. Camera 12 dead for years, powered on by itself. I remembered the first rule: do not look at camera 12 if it turns on by itself. Every instinct told me to avoid it, but curiosity outweighed fear. I clicked into the feed. The pediatric hallway appeared dark, silent, abandoned. Dust drifted through the pale glow of an exit sign. A small figure stepped into frame, a girl maybe 8 years old, wearing a hospital gown and bare feet. Her hair was tied in uneven pigtails, as if someone had braided them in a hurry long ago. She walked slowly, stopping directly in front of the camera. Her mouth didn't move, but the audio activated anyway, full of static and breath. "We know you can see." The feed cut to black. I sat staring at the empty monitor long after the screen went dark, realizing something I hadn't admitted until this rest haunting the hospital. They were trying to communicate. They didn't want to be feared. They wanted to be acknowledged. And somehow, for reasons I didn't understand yet, they believed I was the one who could finally do it. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that the hospital itself was pushing me toward answers. Every night revealed something new: files misplaced in places they shouldn't be, office drawers unlocked that had always been sealed shut, old ID cards materializing where I swore nothing had been before. It was as if the kids were leading me through a maze they'd already walked 1,000 times, waiting for someone finally willing to follow. The breakthrough came in the most mundane place imaginable: the abandoned administrative office behind radiology. The room had been sealed off due to asbestos, but a section of drywall had collapsed after a storm, leaving a narrow opening. I slipped inside with a flashlight and a mask, picking through dust-covered binders and outdated charts. Most documents were routine hospital admin: budgets, staffing forms, supply orders. But in the bottom drawer of a rusted metal cabinet, beneath stacks of blank prescription pads, I found a leather-bound journal. The name stamped on the cover had faded, but I could still make out 2 letters H. A familiar initial: Dr. Hale. The journal wasn't clinical like most medical logs. It read like a confession. Page after page described a pharmaceutical partnership that promised experimental funding in exchange for pediatric subjects. He wrote about limited oversight, off-record procedures, and incentives tied to efficacy tracking. The accident wasn't mentioned until halfway through the journal, but not as a tragedy. It was written like an opportunity, an unexpected supply of testing candidates, delivered all at once. The entries grew more frantic as the pages continued. He hadn't expected parents demanding answers. Lawsuits were brewing. Federal oversight was closing in. Hale wrote about how he falsified autopsies, scrubbed records, and sealed entire wings under the guise of hazard remediation. The children hadn't died in surgery or due to trauma. Some died from complications weeks after treatments began, unnamed and undocumented. Others were transferred off record. The crash was an excuse to make those disappear as victims of impact injuries. The final entry chilled me more than any ghost could have. If their bodies are gone and their charts are incomplete, they cannot be released. The system holds them forever. It reframed everything. The spirits weren't trapped by the afterlife, they were trapped by bureaucracy. Not spiritually, but procedurally. They were still listed as active patients in a defunct internal system, suspended in an in-between state because no one had formally discharged them. They couldn't leave because, officially, they were still under care. When I confronted the night nurse about the journal, she didn't deny it. She stared at me with tired, glassy eyes, like she'd been carrying this burden alone for decades. "They know they're dead," she whispered, "but the system doesn't. Paperwork matters here. It always has." I thought she was speaking metaphorically until she opened a cabinet and revealed old hospital forms, manual discharge slips, each labeled with patient names from 1998. Only half were filled out. The rest were blank. The children weren't waiting for justice or revenge. They were waiting to go home in the only language the hospital understood: signatures and files. "They're not haunting us," she continued. "They're waiting for someone who will finish what the paperwork never did." The weight of that realization settled in my chest like a stone. I could finish it. I had access to records. I understood medical protocol. And more than anything, I owed them. Maybe not personally, but spiritually, like someone who had been chosen because he couldn't turn away from a dying child. Later that night, as I sat in the dark office preparing to start the first form, the lights flickered. The printer in the corner, long unplugged and covered in dust, hummed to life. Paper fed through with slow mechanical groans, the gears struggling like a machine waking from a long coma. I reached out instinctively, but it printed before I touched anything. One sheet, then another, until a stack of warm pages filled the tray. Each page had a name, a full list. 21 children. At the bottom of each page, in faint gray text, "discharge, pending signature." Quiet, I stared at the stack, heart pounding, as the printer whirred to a halt. The machine wasn't plugged in. The power breaker to this wing had been shut off for years. Yet the hospital had delivered the paperwork to me, anyway, names that had been waiting decades for closure. Not a warning, not a threat, an invitation, and a responsibility. I waited all day with the stack of discharge files sealed in a manila folder, trying to convince myself that what I planned to do was rational. But the truth was simpler than reason. Those kids had been stuck here for 27 years because no one cared enough to finish what was abandoned. Bureaucracy bound them to a place that forgot they existed. If a signature could free them, then a signature was what they deserved. That night, I arrived early. I unlocked the hospital as usual, checked the west doors, scanned the perimeter, confirmed the cameras were rolling, not because I expected help, but because something about having documentation made the whole thing feel real. Official. like a shift report instead of a seance. Just before 2:43, the temperature began to drop. Not violently cold, like the mausoleum in the cemetery story I once heard, but quiet, slow, concentrated, like the entire wing exhaled at once. The pediatric wing door, the same one I'd been warned never to open between 2 and 3 a.m., was already cracked open, just wide enough to see darkness beyond. Normally, that door needed a keycard and 3 tries to register. Tonight, it waited for me. I stepped inside with the folder clutched to my chest. Children lined the hallway. Not glowing, not cinematic apparitions, just silhouettes of small bodies sitting on floors, leaning against walls, holding stuffed animals so old. The fabric seemed to dissolve into the air. Some faced me. Some stared at the ceiling. Others sat with knees pulled to their chest, like they'd been waiting for decades, and finally gave up trying to look hopeful. None of them looked angry. They looked tired. One little boy rested against a rusted 4-pole, head tilted, legs swinging softly, like he remembered the motion, but not why he was doing it. A girl sat cross-legged near the nurse's station, clutching a paper hospital bracelet that faded each time she blinked. They watched me, but not with curiosity, more like recognition. They knew why I was here. My hands shook as I opened the first file. Nathaniel Brooks, age 9. I didn't know the medical codes, or what cause of discharge should mean for a child who never got a funeral, so I wrote the only honest thing I could, released from care. I signed my name. The pen left a line darker than ink should allow. The boy near the 4-pole lifted his head. He blinked slowly, as if realizing something finally made sense. Then he stood, not urgently, just with quiet relief, and walked toward the end of the hall where the shadows folded into warm light. When he stepped through, the 4-pole tipped and vanished with him. The air warmed a few degrees. I opened the next file. Ariana Cole, age 7. Sign: Marcus Hall, age 8. Sign: Evelyn Sanders, age 6. Sign: One by one, they faded, not in a puff of smoke, not dramatically, just slipping out of view like they had somewhere else to be and finally had permission to go. Each disappearance softened the hallway a little more. Fluorescent bulbs that had flickered for years steadied. The smell of mildew evaporated. A draft I had always assumed was structural stopped blowing. By the 14th signature, the warmth was noticeable, like the wing remembered it wasn't supposed to be a tomb. By the 19th, the building sounded different. Less echo, more breath. When I reached the final pages, my hands were sweating so badly I nearly smudged the ink. 20 children gone. Only one remained. I could feel it before I saw it, this quiet presence behind me. Small, patient, close enough to touch. I closed the folder slowly and turned. A girl stood alone in the dead center of the hall. Blonde hair, hospital gown, eyes that looked older than time. She didn't glow. She didn't flicker. She simply existed, solid and heartbreakingly real. Every other child had disappeared the moment their form was signed. She hadn't. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper, like she'd been waiting to speak for decades, and finally found the words. You forgot me. Not angry. Not accusing. Just devastated. And when she said it, the hallway grew cold again. Not the cold of spirits passing on. The cold of someone still trapped. The cold of a child who never got a name. You forgot me. The girl stood alone beneath the flickering emergency light. Small hands clasped in front of her. Hair falling in uneven strands around her face. Every other child had vanished quietly, dissolving into warmth, like they were finally allowed to rest. But she remained solid, still, watching me with eyes far too knowing for a child who looked no older than 7. "I didn't forget you," I said softly, lifting the folder. "Your file, it's missing. I only had 20 charts." She shook her head once, subtle, like she'd been expecting that answer. "You never had mine." "I can get it," I said, voice tight. "Maybe it's misfiled, archived, mislabeled." "No," she interrupted gently. "It never existed." The warmth that had been spreading through the pediatric wing retreated in an instant. The hallway dimmed, shadows stretching along the tile like spilled ink. "I wasn't in the crash," she whispered. "I came here after." My stomach dropped. "After the accident?" She lifted her eyes to mine, sad, not accusing. "I was already a patient here. I wasn't supposed to get that medicine. He said it would help me breathe better." The fluorescent lights crackled overhead. "He didn't mean to hurt me," she continued, voice trembling like she was remembering the moment she stopped being alive. "But when I stopped breathing, he hid it. He didn't want anyone to know he made a mistake." The building groaned, like the metal beams themselves disapproved. Files rustled behind me on the desk, papers shaking as if stirred by wind that didn't exist. "So they never discharged you," I whispered. She nodded. "They didn't even write me down." A chill crawled across the back of my neck, not fear of her, but fear of the truth. These children weren't trapped because they were dead, they were trapped because the institution refused to acknowledge what happened. And then she said something that froze me in place. "If I leave, someone has to stay." Before I could respond, every overhead light snapped off, plunging us into darkness except for one sudden glow at the far end of the hall, camera 12. The feed flickered alive on a dusty security monitor. But it wasn't showing the hallway. It showed an ambulance bay soaked in rain. Paramedics rushing a stretcher toward the hospital doors. Gasps. Sirens. Hands compressing a chest that looked too small. And one medic, young, soaked, frantic, stood frozen, yelling to someone off camera instead of pushing the gurney inside. Me. I staggered closer to the monitor. The memory slammed into me before the logic could. I had been there that night, assigned as secondary responder. I wasn't lead on the bus crash, but I was the one who drove the backup rig to the hospital. I assumed someone else called ahead. No one did. Those minutes lost at the ER bay, they could have been everything. The girl squeezed my fingers, icy and fragile. "You remembered," she whispered. "We all did." My throat tightened. "I didn't know. But now you do," she said. "And now we're not alone anymore." The blank file in my hand, no name, no ID, waiting for a signature, felt heavier than paper should. Like the hospital itself was watching. "You can help me leave," she said. Her voice softened to something almost hopeful. Or she tilted her head, eyes bright like something newly alive. "You can stay with us. Just for tonight." The hallway hummed with electricity. The warmth from the other children was gone. Just me, the girl, and that open space between worlds. The blank discharge form hovered under my pen. I didn't sign it. Not yet. The lights went out. Darkness swallowed us whole.